December 20th, 1943, high above the hostile skies of Germany. A Luftwaffe fighter pilot skillfully maneuvered his Messerschmitt Bf 109 alongside a gravely crippled American B-17 bomber. Through their shattered windows, the American crew could clearly discern the German pilot. He, in turn, saw them, wounded, desperate, and struggling valiantly to keep their damaged aircraft aloft. A single burst from his guns would have sealed their fate. His finger, poised on the trigger, represented an immediate end. He had already downed numerous enemy planes, and just one more kill would secure him the Knight's Cross, Germany's most esteemed military decoration. Yet, in that critical moment, Franz Stigler made a decision that, by all military standards, should have led to his execution. He chose to save them. Franz Stigler was neither a reluctant participant in the war nor a secret pacifist. He was, in fact, a highly professional and exceptionally skilled fighter pilot. Born in Bavaria in 1915, Stigler's life was intertwined with aviation from an early age. Both his father and uncle had been World War I pilots. Flying was, quite literally, in his blood. By the time World War II erupted, he had already accumulated thousands of flight hours as a civilian pilot and flight instructor. He joined the Luftwaffe in 1940 and was assigned to fighter pilot training. Among his instructors were some of Germany's most celebrated aces, including Gustav Rudall, an officer who instilled in Stigler not merely the tactics of combat, but also the profound importance of fighting with honor. By December 1943, Stigler had undeniably proven his mettle in battle. He had flown demanding missions across North Africa, Sicily, and Italy before being reassigned to the crucial defense of Germany itself. He had been shot down multiple times and miraculously survived each incident. With 22 confirmed kills against Allied aircraft, the 28-year-old Stigler was an experienced and indispensable pilot, precisely the kind the Luftwaffe desperately needed as American bombers began to systematically devastate German cities. However, he was also a pilot who deeply internalized Gustav Rudall's sage advice. You follow the rules of war for you, not your enemy. You fight by rules to keep your humanity. On the somber morning of December 20th, 1943, the U.S. 8th Air Force launched a major bombing raid targeting aircraft factories in Bremen, Germany. The B-17 bomber, famously known as Ye Old Pub, was a part of this formation, piloted by 21-year-old Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown on his very first combat mission as pilot-in-command. The mission immediately spiraled into disaster. German fighters relentlessly attacked the formation, and Ye Old Pub sustained multiple cannon hits. Its No. 2 engine was completely destroyed, and the No. 4 engine was severely damaged, spewing oil. The electrical system began to fail, and the oxygen system was shot out, leading to critical hypoxia among the crew at high altitude. Then, the situation deteriorated further. The tail gunner, Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode, was killed instantly by cannon fire, and several other crew members were gravely wounded. The bomber's nose was shattered, and its tail section was so catastrophically damaged that the rear gunner's position was nearly torn off. Holes large enough for a man to crawl through perforated the fuselage. Despite the unimaginable chaos, Charlie Brown managed to release their bombs and turn the crippled aircraft toward England. But Ye Old Pub had fallen out of formation. In the brutal air war over Germany, a lone bomber was almost certainly a doomed bomber. German fighters relentlessly swarmed any isolated aircraft. The B-17 limped along at barely 2,000 feet, far below its normal operational altitude, desperately struggling to reach the relative safety of the North Sea. The crew knew more fighters would inevitably come. They had virtually no ammunition left, and several of their defensive guns were destroyed. They were utterly defenseless. Franz Stigler had just landed at Jever Airfield to refuel and rearm after a previous engagement. He was still in his cockpit when ground crew members began shouting and pointing excitedly. A B-17 was flying directly past the airfield at an extremely low altitude, an unbelievably easy target. Stigler took off without a moment's hesitation. This encounter, he believed, would be effortlessly simple. The bomber was critically damaged, alone, flying low and slow. His Bf-109 was superior in speed and maneuverability and fully armed. He closed in from behind, positioning himself for the attack. He needed just one more confirmed kill to earn the coveted Knight's Cross. This was it. Stigler pulled alongside the bomber, a standard procedure to verify its American markings and select his optimal point of attack. Get a good look, then shoot. But what he witnessed through the gaping holes in the fuselage stopped him cold. He could see directly inside the bomber. He could see the crew. The tail gunner was unmistakably dead, slumped lifelessly in his position. Other crew members were visibly wounded, bloodied, and struggling to perform their duties amidst the devastation. The tail section was so incredibly ravaged that Stigler couldn't fathom how it remained attached. The entire aircraft looked as if it had been put through a shredder. Stigler's gaze then fell upon the cockpit, where he could see Charlie Brown battling to maintain control of the aircraft. The young American pilot looked back at him. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Franz Stigler was profoundly reminded of Gustav Rudolph's words. What he was observing was no longer merely an enemy bomber. It was a flying coffin filled with dying men. To shoot them down now would not be an act of combat, but an act of murder. The German military code of honor, ingrained in him by Rudolph, held a sacred rule. You don't shoot a parachute. A man descending by parachute was defenseless, no longer a threat, and deserved the chance to survive. These men, trapped in their shattered bomber, were no different. They were as defenseless as someone hanging from a parachute. The bomber could barely fly, and it certainly couldn't fight back. In that instant, Franz Stigler made his momentous decision. Stigler gently maneuvered his fighter into formation alongside the B-17. He flew so close to their wing that the American crew could clearly see him. Inside, ye old pub, panic momentarily seized the crew. A German fighter, right beside them. They braced themselves for the inevitable burst of gunfire. Some crew members frantically tried to man their damaged guns, but they had almost no ammunition, and the weapons barely functioned. Stigler waved at them. He then pointed down toward Germany, clearly indicating that they should land. The Americans refused, steadfastly maintaining their course toward England. Stigler stayed with them. He understood their choice. Landing in Germany meant certain capture and becoming prisoners of war. They preferred to risk everything for a chance to reach home. What Stigler did next was even more extraordinary. He shifted his fighter into a protective position, flying slightly ahead and to the side of the bomber, making his presence unmistakable to anyone observing from the ground. His presence served a vital purpose. German anti-aircraft batteries on the ground and aboard ships in the coastal waters were ordered to fire on any Allied aircraft. However, with a German fighter flying in such close formation with the bomber, the gunners could not determine if it was a captured aircraft being escorted in or perhaps some unusual training exercise. They held their fire. Stigler was using his own fighter to shield the American bomber from the very forces he served. They flew in this improbable formation for several tense minutes, crossing the German coast and heading out over the North Sea. Stigler was acutely aware that every second he remained with them multiplied the risk of being spotted by his superiors. Another second, and someone might report his unthinkable actions. If anyone in the Luftwaffe discovered that he had deliberately allowed an enemy bomber to escape, worse, actively helped it escape, he would face a court-martial. The penalty for such an act was execution. Over the North Sea, having reached the absolute limit of how far he could safely escort them, Stigler pulled in close one final time. He looked directly at Charlie Brown in the cockpit. He then rendered a formal, military salute, one pilot to another. With that poignant gesture, he broke formation, turned his Bf 109 back toward Germany, and flew away. Charlie Brown and his bewildered crew watched the German fighter disappear into the distance. They simply could not comprehend what had just transpired. An enemy pilot had just saved their lives. Ye Old Pub continued its arduous journey across the North Sea. Miraculously, the severely damaged bomber made it to England, barely, landing at an emergency airfield on the British coast. When the ground crew saw the extent of the damage, they were incredulous that the aircraft had managed to stay in the air at all. The bomber was so badly damaged that it never flew again and was ultimately scrapped for parts. All surviving crew members made it home. Franz Stigler returned to base. He never reported the encounter, never breathed a word to anyone in the Luftwaffe about what he had done. It was far too dangerous. Helping an enemy bomber escape was not an act of mercy under German military law. It was treason. He continued flying combat missions until the war's end, survived the conflict, eventually surrendered to American forces, and immigrated to Canada in 1953, where he built a successful business career. Charlie Brown also survived the war, returned to the United States, eventually became a diplomat, and lived a quiet life. But neither man could ever erase the memory of what happened that extraordinary day over Germany. Charlie Brown carried the indelible memory of the German pilot who had saved his life. He instructed his crew never to speak of it. If the U.S. military discovered they had been spared by an enemy pilot, there might be awkward questions about the circumstances and their conduct. So, they remained silent. Franz Stigler, too, carried the heavy memory. He had violated direct orders and risked certain execution to save the lives of his enemies. He couldn't speak about it either. For more than 40 years, both men meticulously guarded their profound secret. In 1986, Charlie Brown, driven by an unyielding desire, decided to try and find the German pilot. He published a notice in a Combat Pilot Association newsletter, vividly describing the encounter and appealing for any information about the Luftwaffe pilot's identity. This notice, by a twist of fate, reached Franz Stigler in Canada. In 1990, they met for the first time since that fateful day in 1943. Charlie Brown was 68 years old, and Franz Stigler was 75. They recognized each other instantly. Franz confirmed every single detail of Charlie's incredible story. He explained his decision, the profound code of honor he lived by, the vivid memory of Gustav Rudolph's teachings, and the heartbreaking sight of the wounded crew. He confessed to carrying a deep sense of guilt for 47 years, not for sparing them, but for all the other aircraft he had shot down. The Americans he had saved had served as a powerful, constant reminder that his enemies were, in fact, human beings, not merely targets. The two men forged an exceptionally close friendship. They spent their remaining years together, often appearing at air shows, sharing their remarkable story, and corresponding regularly. They spoke on the phone every single week. Franz Stigler passed away in 2008 at the age of 92. Charlie Brown followed him in death just 8 months later, at age 87. They are buried not far from each other. Before his death, Franz told interviewers that saving Charlie Brown's crew was unequivocally the best thing he had ever done. Charlie Brown, for his part, often said that Franz was like a brother to him. Franz Stigler's decision on December 20th, 1943, was not driven by political alignments or ideological convictions. It was about something far simpler and infinitely more fundamental, the profound recognition of shared humanity. Even amidst the brutal totality of war, he risked his own execution to spare the lives of 10 men he had never met and would never see again. He gained nothing tangible from it. In fact, it cost him dearly, as he never received his Knight's Cross or the military recognition so highly valued in German culture. But what he did gain was the preservation of his own humanity. He upheld the code of honor he had been taught, even when it directly contradicted his orders and put his life in extreme peril. This story also illuminates something significant about the culture of fighter pilots in World War II. Despite fighting on opposing sides, and despite the pervasive propaganda and hatred of the war, many pilots maintained an unwritten code of conduct rooted in mutual respect. They viewed themselves as warriors, not as murderers. There were unspoken, but clearly understood, rules. Franz and Charlie's enduring friendship after the war served as powerful proof that the humanity they recognized in each other that fateful day in 1943 was profoundly real and lasted a lifetime. Their true enemies were not the individuals in the other aircraft. Their enemies were the devastating circumstances that placed them there. What Franz Stigler did that day was profoundly simple. He looked at his enemy and saw fellow human beings in dire trouble. He chose mercy over duty, and that singular choice irrevocably defined the rest of both their extraordinary lives.